Good evening. Thank you for coming here tonight. I think you're going to find a lot of good information, and we're going to have Q&A last after the presentations are over. But I'd like to introduce everybody. Deacon Kim Carroll, Mary Bruner, Jerry Means, myself, Jack Clary. Chris Knapp. Well, it's just on mine a little bit blank. And I'm going to ask Deacon Carroll to give the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Lord God, as we come to this evening, we give you thanks and praise. Thanks and praise for this opportunity to gather as community. A community invested with this gift of life, the gift of love. So many different expressions, the gift of faith. And so as we gather this night, we just pray that you send the fullness of the Holy Spirit into this gathering. Open our eyes, our ears, our minds, and our hearts to who you would invite us to be as a beacon of light, a beacon of salt. As we be that living presence, your presence, that expression of hope, that expression of anticipation, as together we discern, reflect, and process all the multitude of opportunities that you bless us with. We thank you for this season, and the multitude of blessings you've already poured forth in our communities. And so it is, we entrust this time to you, to the power of the Holy Spirit, asking all this in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. Amen. Now if you join. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mary Bruner will be the first presenter, and she's School Board of Trustees. I'll turn this over to her.
Thank you, Jack. Good evening. Okay, as we're waiting for everybody to kind of take a seat and calm down, again, my name is Mary Bruner. I was elected to the school board just this last fall, so I'm still considered, in my opinion, a newbie. There's a really big learning curve on boards like this, so bear with me. My goal tonight is just to give you an update on what's been happening in our school district for just the last couple of months. So let's get started. All right, so the first thing I want to cover is the ESA accounts. Our legislature this last spring passed for our state to have the school choice program. It was named the Steamboat Legacy Scholarship Act. Under this new law, families can apply and receive up to $7,000 to be used for a non-public school in their county. If they want to go to a private Christian school or if they're homeschooling, they can apply to go to an accredited facility to receive these funds. It will be monitored through the WDE as they allocate those funds out. Up to 4,000 students were depending on that, but a couple days before the funds were going to start being dispersed, it was challenged by the WEA and a couple of private parents. Unfortunately, the judge has completely stopped the allocation of funds, and it is being challenged up to the Supreme Court, Wyoming Supreme Court right now. Parent choice is huge. I'm a big advocate for that, so I am very disappointed that this is happening in our state. I am encouraged that under the Big Beautiful Bill, there is going to be a tax credit that's going to go into effect January 1 in 2027 that will give tax relief to families that are choosing to go the non-public school route. But before then, I hope that this gets settled and gets settled in favor of the parents. So next is the budget. We went through the budget process this summer and we passed our budget. It is $323.4 million for this year. I got to turn that page. Now that is the entire budget. That includes the operating budget plus like the major maintenance, the capital projects, nutrition services, and so on. So when we talk about how much money do we pay per student, we go off of the general budget number. And that number is $174.8 million. That is an increase of $4 million from last year's school budget. So that does equal out to be approximately $20,000 are spent per student in our district. So if you take that and back to even with what we just talked about with the savings account for parents to choose, $7,000 versus the $20,000 makes you wonder, what are you getting for that $20,000 per student? So that's just something to chew on and wonder what's going on. Under that operating budget is the salaries, the benefits. We have 101.5 mil going to salaries, and that includes the 6.6% raise that all staff got, not just the teachers, this past spring to our district. So. Concealed weapons. So that policy went into effect July 1st. That also was out of the legislature from this spring. So as of July 1st, across the state, any public person going into the schools can conceal carry. Open carry is not allowed. We did pass a policy to ensure that you cannot open carry. Students are also not allowed to conceal carry. For the staff who would like to conceal carry, they do have to apply within the district, and there are some strict regulations for them to go through in order to be able to conceal carry in the schools. That policy was in place already before this law was passed. For Campbell County, we had it for some rural schools. So now we went through and revamped it, and it is applicable to all employees of Campbell County School District. We were able to, if you guys were at the last meeting that we did, I did kind of cover the strict training requirements under that policy that was there in place. I was able to help kind of get that changed a little. So now we are requiring 24 hours of live fire training, 8 hours of scenario-based training, and they also have to go through 4 hours of stop the bleed training. In top of all of that, they also have to pass a psychological exam. So, yeah. Well, I think you can see two sides to that. So my next initiative when it comes to the concealed weapons policy is I would like to see these employees get compensated. Because right now, with the way that our policy is written, the school district is anticipating and expecting for these employees to actively engage a shooter, not to stay in their classroom and protect their classroom. They are expecting them to engage that shooter. So I feel like that could be discouraging for an employee to want to participate in this program. So I would like to see us compensate them for their time, for the training, and to be willing to stand up for their children, for our children in the classrooms. We love to talk about safety in our schools. It was something that I ran on with my platform, and I would love to announce that Councilman Jack Clary has taken the most recent initiative to form an alliance with the school board to come up with some positive solutions for the crosswalks. There's one that really was drawn to his attention, but not just that one, but there's others in town. Our neighborhoods are growing. We've had several complaints from parents and principals about the lack of safety for the students when they get out of school running across the street. So if I have this correctly, the city is going to be doing some street studies, and they are working closely with our administration to make sure that we are keeping our students safe before and after school. And yes, and just to reiterate, whenever I was campaigning hard last year, I really focused a lot on school safety, which is something that we've talked already about tonight. Teacher support, I've been a big advocate for the raises for the teachers, and I will continue to fight for that, and not just for financial concerns for them, but also just support in the classrooms. And then back to the basics with the curriculum goals. I feel really strongly about that. I think that we need to hone back in on how education was even when I was in school, and most everybody in here. Let's get focused on, the basics, math, arithmetic, reading, to just enhance our education, and then maybe we won't need that $20,000 per student if we can get back to that. Thank you. I will introduce Jerry Means next, County Commissioner.
Unfortunately, I'm not a good writer, I'm not a good speaker, but I do have a wife that helps me out. So we tried to put some thoughts together so that Jerry could be understood when he was trying to talk. I did have some things to talk about from the school district and the college, but we're really here for what's happening with the nuclear energy. So I'll start off with last Sunday evening, the night before school started. My wife and I had a wonderful opportunity to have dinner at a local restaurant with our kids and grandkids that live in Gillette. As I looked down the long table, it was almost a moment frozen time. One of those moments that you never forget. At the table were 6 adults, 8 grandkids ranging from ages 7 to 20. Everyone was enjoying good food, laughing, and giving each other a hard time. For me, it was one of those special times that you can never put a price on. As all parents and grandparents, I think all the time about the responsibilities of our generation for future generations. I do worry about the future of the next generation and the fact that a healthy, wholesome, and prosperous future has no price tag for them. I am not an expert on nuclear energy. My comments are on nuclear will be rather general, but hopefully my points will be starting place for conversations and questions. My expertise lies in the oil, gas, and coal. These industries have fought enormous criticism and negative publicity for many years from climate extremists and green energy groups. Trump's administration has started to remove some of these stifling regulations from prior administrations. Much damage has been done to the coal power plants that were shut down and dismantled. Also, I can hardly read. In 2021, Governor Mark Gordon, U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm, and TerraPower Chairman and co-founder Bill Gates announced the new Natrium nuclear reactor project in Cameron, replacing an aging coal plant. An exception to Wyoming's law was created to store nuclear waste. TerraPower has evaluated 3 other sites in the state of Wyoming: Gillette, Rock Springs, Glen Rock, each with existing facilities and transmission. More recently, companies who would like to begin producing small portable nuclear reactors have expressed much interest in setting up productions of these reactors at sites in Wyoming. These portable reactors would be fueled on site with small ceramic pellets and then brought back in a few years to be refueled. The nuclear waste would then be stored in Wyoming. Again, how many times do we create exceptions? Much confusion and questions about the recent nuclear projects. One minute, the federal government is talking about how we energize coal mines, and the next, how we replace them with nuclear energy. In my mind, I wonder how we proceed with nuclear energy. Nuclear reactors are intriguing, but the lack of solution for waste disposal is troubling. The waste problem, as it remains radioactive, may last for 250,000 years or more. No one knows for sure. Whenever I research nuclear waste, I find increasing reports on leakage, storage problems, and contamination. Neither the government, or the nuclear companies have solved the problem in 80 years. It's a continued problem. I recently visited Idaho Nuclear Laboratories. The facility is very impressive, over 900,000 acres, approximately 50 miles from Idaho Falls. The campus and research facility in Idaho Falls. Questions and concerns have remained with me since I visited. I've learned that Idaho must remove all nuclear waste in storage by 2035. They mentioned several times at this conference that Wyoming would become partners with Idaho Falls. I can see your concerns already. Are we the new waste site for Idaho Falls?
How about the United States?
Or the United States? Obviously, these containers have they moved nuclear waste from old containers to new ones. While I was there, they took us on a visit to a site, and they had stored nuclear waste in these dry cast containers with black lids. And then they had to move the contaminant to the yellow lids. And when you see these facilities, there are several rows, and these are quite the containers. I asked the person that was given the tour what happened. What caused the problem for these to have this material to have to be moved? Was it a mitigation problem with the cast? What was the problem? And they said they would get back with me. I am still waiting for them to get back with me. But when we're talking about these casts, and they're supposed to be good for unlimited time, and basically they told us that 40 years plus. Obviously, we had a failure in less than 40 years.
Repeat, how many?
40 years.
How many failures?
They didn't say. They just said that there's probably 200 casts there, and they moved the material from them and put them in new casts. They're probably within, I would say, 100 yards of the existing ones. I should have just kept reading, now I got lost. I'm also very concerned about the big push to find new sites for national repositories by our federal government and the amount of money they're willing to pay. In closing, I believe my duty as a commissioner is to represent all the people of Campbell County. I consider it my job to try and keep our communities clean and safe, and most importantly, informed. I am disappointed in some of the Wyoming representatives who feel differently. Are they smarter than the average citizen? Or are they pursuing contracts within the cities of dollars? Campbell County is fortunate to have representatives that we have that represent Campbell County. I will admit that a few months back, I had no understanding of nuclear energy. But in the last 30 days, I have probably 150 pages of articles. And most of them I do not understand. I will not tell you that I'm proficient in nuclear energy. But in all reality, I would like everybody in this room to do the same thing. Become more familiar and a better understanding of what this is. Because we know it's a future. There are some articles that are interesting to me. They were the Hanford, the Rocky Point, and the Savannah. But these are nuclear warhead or weapons material, totally different than our spent fuel for our reactors. But in all honesty, we need to be as informed as we possibly can for what the future is bringing to our doorstep. Nuclear companies and authorities and specialists plan on visiting Campbell County in the near future to inform and answer questions. Please get involved, do the research, ask them tough questions, be aware of anyone who says, trust us. As we move into the future and new and innovative ideas, we must be mindful of the risks and of creating problems for our future generations. Thank you very much.
Hello. I want to tell you a little bit what I've done since I've been on city council. I have made promises to my constituents as I was campaigning. One is to transparency, have a quarterly meeting like this every quarter, inform the public what we're doing and why we're doing, and also take feedback. Our next one's scheduled for November 20th. So I hope that everybody will come back with energized questions and thoughts and get more people here, because we need to keep them informed. The other promise I've made, be good stewards of you guys' money. I think if you look at my voting record since I've been on city council, I think I've done that. If I haven't, I'd like to talk to anyone who would coach me and tell me what I should have done differently, because I'm open to suggestions. I work for you. That's the bottom line, nobody else. I just want to bring that up, because that's part of when people campaign. They make promises, and you vote for them and then walk away from you. That can't happen. This is all of our community. I don't care if we live in the city or the county. It's all of us. I just want to point that out tonight. I've only got 2 slides, and I wanted this one to inform you that this issue of nuclear didn't come last week, last month, last year. In fact, I believe this is off the City of Gillette's minutes. And the first meeting was on the 23rd of June. Well, no, excuse me, on the 20th of 20, yeah. And they had a meeting at LNH. Can you go to the next slide, please? And it was a special meeting called by the city as normal. And again, it was located at LNH. Elected officials attending was Councilman McClellan, Councilman Montgomery, Councilwoman Gross, Mayor Lumbaugh. And I'm really trying to understand why they had this meeting, but how uninformed the public was up until recently. That should not happen. That's my point of view. And I'll tell you one thing in my closing. I'm not for nuclear. I was asked that many times. I never was, never will be, and that's the way it is. I will not put this community of the Wyoming and the parents of kids at risk. And as you do your research, like Jerry said, you'll find the answer to your questions, how safe this is. And we need to be about safety. That's the bottom line. No matter how many jobs you think we're going to create, that doesn't bring back lives when something happens down the road. So thank you.
Hello. I'm Chris Knapp, representative of House District 53 here in town. I do have a cane with me because I, as you know, typically lean right. In the legislature, I'm on several committees. I'm chairman of corporations and elections, political subdivisions, and then I'm also chairman of management audit. And the reason I bring that up is I just had a call this week from a person in Teton County, and he started the conversation by screaming obscenities at me. So I let him get that out, and we had a good conversation. And after about a half hour, he thanked me for knowing a little bit more about me. Thank you. And for the time that he took to understand the issue, understand who I was, and not generalize me. And the reason I bring that up is I'm on the Minerals Committee as well. And I just came from a committee where we had sitting senators call people to testify liars. We had the chairman use expletives in addressing the crowd. We had senators come testify that actually called me a liar. And I turned to the chairman with all this going on, and I said, Chairman, decorum. Okay. The Speaker of the House chooses us to be chairman in the House. And he does so with the expectation that we uphold certain standards. On the floor of the House, it's kind of interesting, I don't agree with all of it, but on the floor of the House, we're not allowed to use each other's names. We can't use a proper name. We can't use a corporation's name. We can't discuss whether you're a Democrat or Republican, parties, caucuses, anything like that. There's a reason for that. If you've ever watched TV and watched South Korean representatives go at each other with fists rather than words. So it's very important that we have those rules. Those rules filter down into committees that we're in charge of, that we're chairman of. So we make sure those rules exist in committees. That's our job. That's our expectation. But to me, it's more than that. It is a standard, an institutional standard of government, that we discuss things civilly, that we don't attack people personally. And that's just, I'm an idealist, and that's just how I feel about it. It's that important. So lately in the news, you probably heard I disinvited a guest from corporations. Now, I didn't take away that person's right to speak. Constitutionally, we can write whatever we want to. We can say whatever we want to. We get to have our opinions on issues. But to me, when something goes beyond that, and you start talking about people not as individuals, not respecting them, treating them like less than, and using words and phrases similar to that call that I got, in a public discussion, in a public forum. So what I want people to realize is that it is a privilege to come before a committee and be an expert witness. It is a right to come before the committee and speak as a citizen. So the person that I disinvited got 28 minutes speaking as a personal citizen. Normally it's about 3 to 5 minutes. So it is not because of personal issues. It's not because of even individuals. It's because I believe there is an ideal that we need to live up to. Every time we talk to each other, there are people that I will never see eye to eye with on an issue, but certainly we can discuss it civilly. And many times on the floor of the House, we can change minds by using civil discourse, by using logic and facts instead of emotion. I always tell our reps, do not react with emotion from emotion. Come with facts, come with logic, and try to convince somebody that what you believe in might be right, or at least they can see a middle ground. So that's my first out of the way thing. I think I owe the public an explanation. That's it. I haven't answered anything on social media because of that discourse that I believe in. Anyway, talking about nuclear, because we did come from a very heated Minerals Committee meeting. I know Ruben Tarver is here, he's another representative, and he was at that meeting. But the idea is that nuclear was brought to Wyoming by representatives in the past, by individuals that saw an opportunity for Wyoming, for whatever reason. May have been financial, may have been a replacement for what they considered would be clean energy. But the fact is, nuclear, the end result, is the waste. And most of the people, I handed out a little deal that kind of showed the cycle of nuclear. And so I always call it a chain, because nuclear energy is really a chain. It's a chain of supply, it's a chain of enrichment, it's a chain of manufacturing and fabrication, it's a chain of usage, and ultimately refueling and/or waste. So uranium mining, I get a kick out of people. I just came from Riverton, we have a town hall there, and somebody in the crowd always says, well, you walk right by it, you know, we've got open ore just sitting there, and it's no different. Believe me, that open ore compared to nuclear waste coming out of a reactor is very different. One doesn't cause anything for you, the other, if you're exposed to it long enough, you're dead. So we start with uranium mining. I believe we've done it in Wyoming before. I think we do it very differently now. We would do it very differently now, where you wouldn't have the tailings and things like that. So uranium mining is somewhat of a positive. We have one of the largest deposits of ore in the nation from Wyoming.
Wyoming leads the United States in uranium reserves in the state of Wyoming.
That's awesome. That's I think what I just said. So we'll have the ability to answer questions. I think there's like an hour where you can actually raise your hand and ask a question. So, like we said, that is an opportunity for Wyoming. As long as we do it right, there's lots of taxation that comes with that. Where Wyoming government can actually make money in that piece of the chain. The next one that we talk about is fuel manufacturing or fuel fabrication. Because when you talk with BWXT, you'll hear that company used in Gillette. They're one that wants to actually produce fuel in fuel manufacturing. Now, not a lot of waste comes from that particular piece of the chain. It's low level. From what they tell me from WXT, it can actually be put in a 50-gallon drum and shipped out of Wyoming because it's gloves, it's masks, it's gowns and things like that that they use to handle things when they were fuel manufacturing. Reactor construction, that's another piece of the chain. We have Mike Wandler here from L&H Welding, one of the premier manufacturers in the nation for fabrication. They do stuff for NASA. They've done it for years and years and years and are experts in the nation on fabrication. So that is a possibility. We can, these small SMRs, which are small nuclear reactors or advanced nuclear reactors, the micro nuclear reactors, they're wanted by the Defense Department mostly. And they want them to be able to go to different parts of the world, be a source of energy for them where they need something that's reliable versus diesel. And that's why they're looking into that. We also have to replace our fleet. We have a nuclear fleet out there that is aging. And I think the Trump administration sees the benefit of not only mining our own uranium, but also being able to fabricate and use that to replace our fleet. So that's important. Fueling the reactors, and that's putting the fuel into the unit. That's a question. That's a question I've asked BWXT is, excuse me, could we manufacture the fuel? Could we build the device that it's going in, and could you actually put that in safely in Wyoming, or does that need to go somewhere else to happen? So that's questions that we all need to ask. I'm certainly no expert on nuclear, but I've been through enough meetings and gone through enough deep dives to find out a lot of information. And typically it gets to the waste part, and that's where I think everybody's lost. Typically, those units that they send out, so Radiant in Casper, I'm sure you've heard of that going on in Casper, in Barnett. They would send out a small unit, and that would have to come back to be refueled. So it would come back to the state it originated in. They would refuel that and then send that back out. Now what's left, a lot of people like to call it spent fuel. The only misnomer with that is we're now using triso fuel, and we're coming up on, I think, triso 4. So it's been around since probably the 70s, that we keep making it better and better. And the reason is, in those small reactors, it gets down to the size of a peppercorn, and it's surrounded by ceramic. And the reason is it has to get a temperature that is high enough to actually, on a small unit, produce enough energy for what it's replacing. So we're using triso-4 fuel, and the importance of that is triso-4 fuel coming out would be just as hot in waste. And so when we talk about casks, you heard the term casks, and we talk about wet storage and dry storage and thicker casks, it all comes down to what level of waste is that putting off in its storage. Because there's a degradation of steel, there's degradation of concrete, and we haven't had a long enough time to really, really know what kind of cask that should be stored in to last 100 years, 1,000 years. We talk about a permanent repository. That was supposed to be Yucca Mountain. They found, I think, for political reasons, but also geological reasons, why Yucca Mountain would not work. And it was designed to hold about 80,000 tons of nuclear waste. Currently in the US, we have about 120,000 tons that is looking for a home. So what the federal government said was, Yucca Mountain will be the repository. That got passed through a bill in Congress that would be the repository. So what were we stuck with after the fact? We were stuck with saying, okay, the law says there should be a permanent repository. So what we've allowed for is for people to store nuclear waste temporarily. Okay? So temporarily means typically about 40 years. That's what you're permitted for. When that permit is done, you can get re-permitted. Another 20 years, another 40 years. But these casks were made, and the NRC inspects those casks to know that they're safe to use. They were made for 40 plus years. You know, add on some years to that. But that's the reason you had cracking happen. Now, proponents would say there's no through cracking. And I say, well, look at my car right now. I got some rock chips from going to Cheyenne. It continues to crack. It will be a through crack. And eventually, water will leak through there. Now, this isn't water because it's dry storage, but there are gases, and there's pressure in that. And so it's important to know what you're giving up. I'm a business owner. I always weigh what your opportunity is to what your liability is, right? And so when it comes to waste, which the fear is, there's already been bills proposed. It's not as if this is a boogeyman or a fear mongering. It's bills have been proposed, several of them, that have asked to bring waste from across the country into Wyoming to store. Okay. And so it's here. People are proponents of it. And we just need to educate ourselves as to, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Like I said, every chain component in nuclear energy Some of it we can do safely, definitely. But that last piece is what we need to educate ourselves on and ensure that that bill does not come again until we know that the government has found a central repository, that they can do it safely. So that temporary doesn't mean permanent here, because it's always a play on words. You store it temporarily, and everybody thinks, oh, well, then it goes away. Not until they find a repository, right? It's been 70 years, and they haven't found one. So, do we look forward to the time that they do? Absolutely. But do we bank on that? Do we gamble on that? No, we don't. So the fear now is they're looking for, across the country, what they call intermediate repositories. What does that mean? Well, intermediate means 100 years. Okay? So they're trying to, like anything, with landfills or anything else, you try to consolidate sometimes in the state to having big landfills and having smaller entities dump there. It's the same thing with nuclear. They're looking right now for repositories across the U.S. And those repositories are sometimes at the invitation of states. So you see Texas, New Mexico, they store nuclear waste on site there. What happened to Texas was they were selected by the NRC, because they're the permitting authority, directly to a vendor, because that's how it works. They don't do it through the state, it's directly to a vendor. They decided they would put a repository on the Permian Basin to include up to 40,000 tons of nuclear waste. So Texas obviously was a little upset by that. The NRC told them, well, you can't complain right now. You can't fill out a form because this is between us and the vendor. So they didn't. But what they did was they ultimately sued. And there was two parts to the litigation. One part was the Supreme Court said, you can't sue because you didn't have standing. Because you weren't allowed to make a complaint in the first place, you don't have standing now. Okay, so that was the one thing they decided. The second thing was, does the agency themselves have the right to permit a facility with a private entity without the state's permission that have nuclear waste come in from out of state to be stored there? And that was never answered. That was never answered in the case. So the fear that we have in Wyoming is, if we open the door to temporary waste, if we open the door to intermediate waste, will we be the next victim of the NRC in coming to say, you know what, around Riverton, there's an excellent place that we can store nuclear waste. And if we have a private citizen that wants to permit that, what's to stop them? Right? What's to stop them? Legislation, number one. So we have a law right now that says there is no capability of doing that. You cannot bring nuclear waste from outside the state, bring it into Wyoming, and make a repository out of that. We do have the law that exempted Kimmer, which is Bill Gates' project in Kimmer. We exempted that to store temporary waste on site. Now that's a pilot project. I'll probably want to address that sometime in legislation too. But that's a pilot project. But the idea is that dotting the state will be more Kimmers. And they can store on site temporarily. So that has to be approved by the legislature to do that. So we do have some safeguards there. The BWXT, again, they're interested in the fuel, but they also have pre-contracts, at least, with the Trona mines in Wyoming. And so they do plan on building the same, it's an advanced microreactor, basically. but they have plans of doing that as well. So we just kind of have to keep our ears open, our eyes open, make sure that we learn as much as we can. And again, I'm no expert. I get corrected on a lot of different things. And that's great because we do have experts that testify, including from the DOE, Department of Energy. We've had people from the NRC. And one interesting question that I asked them on waste with the NRC was this. So whether it's Washington State, for instance, now they are dealing with plutonium, which is different, but high-level radioactive waste also is not quite that category, but in some studies I've read is more. They're dealing with a situation where they have a lot of the military's fuel that they made. Their cleanup cost to date is $50 billion, estimated to go to at least 2,100 as a date for cleanup, to the tune of $600 billion. Now, BWXT is actually in charge of that cleanup site currently. So I asked them that question to see if those numbers were correct, and they didn't blink an eye. Absolutely they are. So again, the question is what you want to put out as far as opportunity in waste versus the cost of waste currently. And so, yes, they may come up with a permanent repository. Yes, they may come up with a way to store that waste. Hanford is an example of liquid waste and storage. They went to a dry casking, is what they call it. They mentioned that. That dry casking went for probably about 30 years. The problem with it, and this is from the NRC's own documentation, is you can't look at it, you can't reopen that, you can't put it in another container, you can't inspect it the way that you would want to inspect it. You can measure what's around it to see if it's leaked, you can measure the radiation that's coming out of it, but you can't get inside those canisters. And so there is cracking. So they'll say there's never been a leak, and that's probably correct out of dry canisters. There's been an explosion. There's been, these cracks. There's also been wells that are failing. So I look at buildings that we built here in Campbell County or through the state penitentiary. Those buildings, eventually that concrete is going to degrade, the steel's going to go bad, and we have to replace those buildings. We're talking about waste that lasts thousands of years, right? So people always say, what is it going to take to convince you? And I said, if you had a camera and you did a time log within a container, a cask, of high-level nuclear waste, because trisol fuel is high level. Normal fuel from a commercial plant is 2.5 to 5%. Trisol fuel comes out 19.72%. That's the difference. So until we have that time, until we have that cask that we put it in, which now they've gone to thick casks instead of thin casks, by the way. So it's just thicker steel, thicker concrete. Until we have that time to see, yes, this is safe. Yes, this is how much it degraded. Yes, we were able to shift it to other containers or find a permanent depository to bury it in and be safe. That piece of it, I think is yet to be determined. And they do have a study going on from President Trump telling the DOE at the time it was 240 days, come up with a solution. Come up with a solution that makes sense, that we can look at, and that probably leans towards a permanent repository. So again, I don't want to stick on that piece of the chain. There are other pieces of the chain that truly we can do, and that will bring taxation and revenue to Wyoming. Another interesting thing, though, is a lot of these are Defense Department contracts. We don't get sales tax on Defense Department contracts. So about 80% of what they're looking at to start off with would be related to the government. There are designs to go commercial with things, but in talking with both companies, that is their goal, is to solve that problem for the federal government and the Department of Defense first. So that's all I've got, folks. Sorry that was a lot. But I continue to learn. I continue to learn from experts through the committee, through going to town halls, from people just approaching me, from people calling me that are experts, to say, hey, think about this on that one. But for the most part, that's the information we have.